Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Independent Publishers of New England's weekly broadcast, Ask the Experts. Every week, we speak with leaders in the field of independent publishing, and they're people from copywriting, people who talk about design, printmaking, printing, etc. And today, we are very fortunate to have with us someone to talk with us about the various different aspects of editing. And we're very fortunate. Kate Hannisian is going to be with us also at the conference on the England Conference, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, on Friday, October 21st and Saturday, October 22nd. And so she agreed to join us today. And Kate is the current owner, she's the owner and the founder of Blue Pencil Consulting. It's a business, a firm that she started on her own after working for 17 years in journalism in the fields of business and economics. She currently, she's a writer, an editor, and a content developer, and she's going to tell us a lot more about exactly what she does after this brief introduction. She basically helps clients tell their stories through books, articles, and other written medium. And she helps people develop book proposals, manuscripts, and also try to find the best route for their publishing needs. She's got degrees in English literature and speech communication, and she's a member of Grub Street, which is a fantastic group of writers here in Boston. She's also a member of the North Shore Business Forum and the Greater Beverly Chamber of Commerce. So thank you so much for joining us, Kate. We're really happy to have you.
Well, thank you very much, Karen. I should note I'm also a member of IPNE as well. I just joined this summer.
Oh, well,
we met both of you at an event. So I am delighted to be here to talk about editing. As sort of joking with somebody else this morning about, action shots of people's businesses. And I laughed and I said, yes, if you bring your little aerial photography drone in and, do close-ups of my desk and my hand moving over the keyboard, that would be so exciting. But, what we do, we sort of sit at desks, but our minds travel everywhere when we are editing. So I am delighted to be joining you here today on Ask the Expert.
Okay, great, thanks. My first question, Kate, is what is an editor and what different kinds of editing are there? It's quite a big field.
It is. Editing encompasses a lot of different activities in the course of publishing a book, for example. Editors are there to help you make your work the very best it can be. That's what I look at my job as being. I'm going to help you polish your book or other work so that it sounds like you. People are reading you to hear your voice, not mine. I'm just in the background helping you communicate clearly and concisely and making sure that if I see something when I'm reading your manuscript that stops me cold as a reader, I flag that for you, and together we try to figure out how do we make this better, how do we make it clearer. That said, editing ranges from developmental editing, which is sort of the 50,000-foot view of a manuscript. How does it hold together as a book? Is this a book? I get that a lot with clients who are at the very early stages of working on their projects. And that's somebody who's going to help you if you're writing nonfiction. Is your premise clear, and are you getting from point A to point Z in an order that's going to make sense to the reader? If it's fiction, is this holding together as a story that somebody wants to read? Are the characters compelling? Does the plot work? Is there a message there that's carried throughout, if that's the kind of a novel that you're writing? So developmental is not fiddling around with punctuation or vocabulary so much as it's looking, how is this hanging together as a book? Then you get into line editing, which is really going line by line, and we're looking at paragraph structure, sentence structure. Then we're looking at vocabulary and a whole host of other things, characterizations if it's fiction. Is it age appropriate for the audience? Are you using vocabulary that's good for the audience that you're trying to reach? Is the tone right? Then you're moving into copy editing, where that's when you're getting into what I call mechanical items like punctuation, grammar, spelling, word choice, but it's also things like are you handling examples the same way throughout the book if you have a lot of examples? And then at the very end, you have a proofreader, and good proofreaders are worth their weight in gold. They find things that editors do not spot. They find things that the authors don't spot. Editors find things that authors can't see because they're too close to their work. But proofreaders find things that everybody else misses, and we are so thankful for them. We love good proofreaders, let me tell you. So that is, in a nutshell, is kind of what the different levels of editing are. And we can go back to any of that at any time if we need to.
Okay, great. Thanks. I really like that kind of the view of you're up above looking down at the manuscript to begin with, and then you kind of like get closer and closer and closer down. That really works for me. In the context of independent publishing, what things have stayed the same and what things have changed in the field of editing recently? I know technology has had a big influence. Are there any other influences, and what big things would you say?
Well, beyond the technology where, we're not necessarily emailing, or we're not necessarily mailing or FedExing big packages of manuscripts, paper with sticky notes and handwritten notes. We're doing electronic documents now, which means life is a lot easier for all of us, editor side and the author side. But I think on the independent publishing side, what's changed beyond the technology, I think, is people's expectations about the process. There's a lot of encouragement to people. Publish your work, get it out there in the world. And oftentimes there's this unspoken, but yet very much implied notion that you should get it out there as soon as you've finished the first draft. And editors, of course, say, no, don't do that. Please edit the thing first. Take your time, put it out there in a form that you're proud of. So sometimes a lot of what I do is just tell people, that's excellent that you finished the first draft, but now let's go through it a few times and make sure that this is the book that you want it to be. And then it's time to publish it, whether you are looking for a contract with a big publisher, whether you're going with an independent publisher, or you are doing it yourself and you're becoming a publisher yourself as an author. So that, I think, is one of the things people are feeling differently about, is let's make it happen sooner. And sometimes they want to skip steps in the process. And one of the editor's jobs is to say, well, let's hold back. Let's take it step by step so that we do have a great end product at the end of this process.
I see. Okay. And what are some of the different factors that help you determine the best publishing route for any sort of manuscript you have? There are so many different ways of publishing books today. So what are some of the variables in publishing, and what sort of different marketing tools and publicity tools do you use? And what do you suggest to someone who is writing, let's say, a crime novel or a piece of literary fiction, or a piece of beautiful nonfiction, let's say history? What are the different variables someone should keep in mind?
Well, I always start when somebody comes to me with an editing project and they're not quite sure how it's going to go out there into the world. We talk a lot about, what is your goal for this book? A number of my nonfiction clients write books that are related to their business in some way. And sometimes they really don't care if there's a big publisher's name on the spine of that book. They just want the book out there as almost an extended calling card for their business. So sometimes for them, if they want to pitch publishers, we can go through that process, but I tell them about the time commitment that takes. And some of them want a book for an event coming up in the near future. And then you say, well, self-publishing is probably the way you need to go. Or if you can work with an indie who can move quickly, you want to investigate those avenues. So sometimes it's a matter of what the mission for the book is and the timing for your project. If you have a work of fiction, whether it's literary or we'll use the term, and I don't like this, but we'll say commercial or genre fiction. Have you thought about how this book meets your audience's expectations for this particular kind of book? And how important is it for you to have a publisher's name on the spine? And if so, which ones? Again, it's all tied into your mission, and to understand the whole publishing process and that once you've written the book, especially if you're doing literary fiction or any kind of fiction, or a literary nonfiction, I guess. Once you've done that, the art piece now becomes the business piece, because your book becomes a business. And I know people have talked about that at the IPNE conferences every year, and we'll probably talk about it again this year. But you have to get that mindset that whatever way you put it out into the marketplace, it's your business, and you will be promoting the book. You are that book's biggest advocate out there in the world, and you have to be thinking about how you will do that, not just about writing the book.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So I've been looking at your site. This is a question from the audience, and I love the concept of book therapy. Can you say something more about that?
Sure. That is a term that I lifted with permission from a client. We were working together on a nonfiction book that's part memoir and part recommendations about how to work on a particular social issue. And I was doing editing, developmental editing on this project, and also helping her with a book proposal. And so there was straight editing, but then there were times when she said, Kate, I just need to call you up and bounce some ideas off you and see if things are going the right direction. And so we did that a number of times. And then at the end of the project, she said, Kate, this is like therapy. It's like book therapy. I feel so much better after I talk to you. So I said, I'm just stealing that and adding that to my laundry list of services. So that is where it came about. And what that is really is, it's another way of saying, let's talk through the issues related to your book that are not necessarily related to what's the book structured, how's the book structured, or are you, doing things as a writer that we can improve, but more, what do you want this book to do? And if you're having trouble with the structuring, that's a conversation. That's not necessarily a memo from me or notes on your manuscript. It might involve that in part, but sometimes it's a conversation where we try things out and we see what's working and what isn't for you as an author. And then it gives that person just some feedback that they might not get from any other source. So that's a place where you can, or if people get stuck in the writing process. I mean, we have lots of stories about how people get stuck and the different ways they can get unstuck. So sometimes we are really dealing with that. So those would be the big components of book therapy.
Okay, great, thanks. Another question that someone has written in is, how much does editing cost? How much should someone set aside for editing? And I would imagine there's a great difference between fiction and non-fictioning, the size of the book, the audience. What are the variables, and what should someone consider when considering cost?
It's not so much whether it's fiction or nonfiction. It's more, for me, when I'm looking at pricing a project, it's what stage is the manuscript at? Am I working with a very rough draft that's going to need a lot of line editing, or maybe we're even at a phase where I'm doing developmental editing. The person has the idea for the book, they may have an outline, but they really haven't wrestled that first draft to the ground yet. Or they have and they need a lot more help. And then sometimes, well, another factor to consider is how long is this manuscript? I edited a fiction project this spring. It was a manuscript that was 200,000 words almost, which is very long. So that was a much more expensive project to edit than one that would have been half that length, or a quarter of that length. So your length of your manuscript is going to be a factor in the pricing, as is how much editing am I doing? Is it heavy lifting? Developmental is more on the heavy lifting side, and copy editing, if you have a relatively clean manuscript that you've been over a number of times and may have even had somebody else look at, then the pricing goes a little bit on the less heavy lifting end of the scale. The rates are kind of all over the map. I mean, if anyone wants to talk to me about their project, I'm happy to talk to them about rates. In general, a great place to look if authors are trying to figure out a budget for editing, they first need to think about what kind of editing help am I going to need. And then a good source, the Writer's Market has a wonderful little feature in it every year. How much should I charge? And that's obviously directed at people who are offering services on the editorial side. But what it does is it gives you ranges of low, average, and high, and sort of sometimes by the hour, sometimes by the page or by the project. So you can get a ballpark of where the industry is. Obviously, it's going to vary by editor and by that person's experience and what you're asking them to do. The Editorial Freelancers Association also has a rate chart that can be very helpful. Again, it's a ballpark. It's not going to give you an exact price for an exact editor. You'd have to negotiate that with each editor. But it gives you a sense of what the marketplace looks like and what your budget might need to be for your project. So that's the short answer on that.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, another question from the audience is how much psychology is involved in this process? And have you ever, what happens if you have a disagreement with an author? Have you ever chosen with an author to go your separate ways because you find that it's not working? And what an author who's kind of struggling with that process right now in terms of the psychology?
Well, I joke, I have book therapy up there as a service, and I was joking with a new client who is a psychologist. I say a lot of times I feel like I'm practicing, without a license here, because everybody's work is very, very personal to them. Right. And I get that, and I understand that this is a really important thing that you're doing. So again, my job is not to tell you what to do as an author. I can only tell you what I'm seeing as a reader and as an editor, and suggest that there are places where it could be made better or made clearer, give you some options for that. Ultimately, you as the author have to decide which of my recommendations to take or ignore. And so, but there's a lot of understanding of what people go through when they get stuck. I mean, I'm working on my own novels very, very slowly. And I know the places where you get stuck and the different things that go through writers' heads. One day you'll look at your manuscript, this is the best chapter I've ever written. The next day you look at it and you're in despair and say, I can't believe this came out of my fingers and brain. Worst trash ever. So I understand that back and forth very, very well. But have I ever had to, fire a client, or has a client ever fired me? Earlier on in my career, I did have a few clients where no matter what I explained about the different kinds of editing and what I thought their project needed, they kept pushing for a particular thing that really wasn't going to work. And we got about halfway through the project and we realized it just wasn't working. So we left, without no ill will or, I wish this author all the best and vice versa, but it just wasn't working. But now what I try to do so that I'm not in that situation and the author's not in that situation either is to really have a good conversation with somebody before we get started about expectations on both of our ends. And, really, I'll ask, can I see your manuscript before we talk? So that I can see what I think it needs. I realize it needs some serious line editing. I'll tell the person that. Conversely, if somebody has just finished a first draft, or maybe they're 2 or 3 drafts in, and it's something like a memoir, and it's really still very raw, and they haven't processed this yet, what they're writing about, I will tell them, you know what? It's not time for me to work with you yet. You need to go back in and work on this some more. And then it will be at a point where I can help you. And I've done that with some clients, and it's worked out much better because I've said, not yet, rather than, oh, sure, let's go ahead right now. So that's what I try to do, is really listen to what somebody is looking for and see if we are a good fit before we get into it. So we don't have to fire each other. I like to avoid that.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question is, I forgot to mention in your introduction, but you're an affiliated faculty member at Emerson College, where you teach publishing and copy editing. And we're discussing a little before the interview, working in academics and kind of the joys and sorrows. And can you think of your, I'm thinking now also of how that's going to relate to the panel that you're going to be in on conference in Fort Smith in just a couple of weeks. How how do you choose your experience must be extensive in terms of teaching, and what sort of questions have come up most frequently in class, and have those questions changed a great deal over time, or do they tend to be the same sorts of inquiries that the students have about what publishing and copywriting are?
Well, I actually haven't been doing the teaching all that long. It's been, I think, 5 years, and it's
Okay.
occasional. But that said, a lot of the questions that the students ask are sometimes what clients ask, or people who also want to be writers or editors. And for my undergraduate students at Emerson, it's a lot of it is career related. They know that the world has changed in publishing. Larger companies have become merged with other big ones, or become smaller or non-existent. We're down to 5, the big 5. It used to be, the big 6, and it was more than that before. So they understand that that's changed, and that the independent publishing and self-publishing has changed the landscape. So they're worried about their careers and what their career path might look like. But they still, need to learn the basics. When I teach copy editing, I tell them most of a copy editor's time is spent looking things up. And that doesn't change. It's just the means and the methods we have for doing that are a lot more convenient. You don't have to run to the library to answer a question or query an author. You can actually look it up on the internet, and if you can find a credible source, you can do that. So that's one of the things. But one thing I noticed when I had a class of grad students in the book publishing area was that, and this may be generational, a number of the men expressed interest in the way I was working, which was for myself and in a home office. They said, I'd really like to do that because I'd like to be able to stay home with my children when I have them. I thought, wow, when I was in college, guys would never say that. So that I thought was an interesting shift. But the ability that we all have as independent editors, people that I know, it's great. We can work with anybody anywhere in the world, and technology lets us do that. And it's kind of, that's a very big change. You don't have to necessarily be in New York, in the epicenter of the publishing world, to work in publishing anymore. So that's kind of an interesting shift, I think.
Okay, great. Someone has just written in, I want Kate to be my book therapist. I thought I'd let you know.
All right.
And another question is, Tanya Gold will be on the editing panel with you at the IPNY conference in a couple of weeks in Portsmouth. Could you tell us a little bit about the format for that session? And are there going to be any hands-on elements, or what should people look forward to?
What we are planning on, we've tentatively named the session Pick the Editor's Brains. And we're going to be talking about some of the things we've covered today in this program. What are the different levels of editing? When is it beneficial to bring an editor in on your project? There are different stages of your publishing project. When does it make sense to have an editor? And if so, what kind and what level of editing is that person doing? And we will be open to all of the attendees' questions. We want your questions. What have you always wondered about either the editing process or working with an editor? We're there to tell you what we know about that whole somewhat mysterious area that people think of for this part of the publishing process. So it will be, we hope, very interactive, a lot of audience Q&A. It's not so much a skill development session as it is really just letting you know what is the editing process and how we best can help you and what you need to know about working with editors.
Okay,
we're your friends.
Okay, fantastic. Let's see. Another question is, what is a book these days? Do you work exclusively on print, or do you do ebooks or online storytelling like Touching Home in China, which is another kind of transmedia project? The author will be also at the conference. So how do you define a book? What's a book?
Wow, that is a question that comes up every year when I teach book publishing at Emerson. And the definition is really fluid. I grew up with paper books and still love paper books. And if the camera were positioned differently, you would see the books all over my office and all over my house, for that matter. So for me, when I first think of book, it's paper. But that said, I work with clients who think I will publish exclusively in print. and then others who say, well, you know what, I'd like this to be an ebook only. Others will do a mix. It really depends on that book and that mission. But the transmedia stuff is fascinating. I have not worked on a lot of that yet. I would love to, because I think it's interesting how you can combine the written word with other things, other elements, and do different kinds of storytelling. But the basics, for me, the editorial basics stay the same. It's just, are we communicating well? That's what it comes down to, is the story or the information that's in the author's brain getting to the reader's brain or the user's brain in a way that, it's not like that game of telephone where the text and words are all distorted, but it's actually coming across clearly, and people are getting something out of it at the end. So yeah, I mean, I think book is a really fluid object at this point. Sometimes it's not even an object. So brave new world for all of us.
Wonderful. Okay, thanks. One last question before I ask you if there's anything you'd like to add, and that's you mentioned earlier that the internet can be a double-edged sword in terms of editing and in terms of writing, for that matter. What exactly did you mean by that?
Let's see. I think it's not just the internet. It's the technology. People think, oh, great, I have spell check. I don't need a copy editor. And you're laughing because you know perfectly well that spell check is a fantastic, useful tool, but it won't save you. And I could tell many, many stories from my career as a journalist where spell check, whether or not it had existed at that point, didn't save us at all. It was just some terrible things.
Fun.
Yes, yeah, and so that's one thing. But then there's also a number of software programs or applications that will check your writing. And again, those can be very useful in flagging things, but I think that there's no substitute for a human brain, evaluating your text and seeing what's working and what isn't, and recommending how to fix it. Because as we know from our smartphones and autocorrect, the suggestions that come to us from the machines are sometimes a little bit ridiculous. So that comes sort of all the way through, whether it's spell check software or grammar checking software. But I think also the double-edged sword piece is, especially for self-publishing, you can write a book today and put it up on CreateSpace tomorrow or on Kindle tomorrow. Whether you should or not is an open question. You may not want to do it quite so quickly, and you need to think about why you want to publish so quickly, or even why you want to publish at all. And so there's this sort of speeded up look at the process where you still need to do the thinking piece and think about how you will market your book once it's out there, because listing it online is not the only way to market the book by a long shot, as many of you know. So I hear laughter in the background. So that would be, I think, what I meant when I gave you that comment. So if I have more thoughts on that, I'll have to put it on my blog. So.
Okay, great. Before we tie things up, is there anything else that you'd like to mention?
Well, as I said, I'm looking forward to the IP&E conference and our Pick the Editor's Brain session with Tanya and myself. That'll be a lot of fun. I hope those of you who are watching who are coming to the conference will check that out. But I guess I would say that editors are here not to be mean to you and mark your copy up with so much red that it looks like it's bleeding. That's not our goal. We're not like your 8th grade English teacher. We're not there to do that at all. We are there really to help make your book or your other piece of writing the best it can be, so that it sounds like you and that it touches the audience that you want to reach in the way that you want to do it. We're there to see the things that you can't see and gently point them out to you and help you make it better and put something out there that you're going to be proud to have your name on. So that's what our function is out there in the world. So.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Kate. It's been such a pleasure talking with you, and I can't wait to actually meet you in person, not just online, in a couple of weeks in Portsmouth. So you've actually just really cleared up a lot of questions I had about editing.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, so once again, we've been speaking with Kate Hannisian, and she's going to be at the conference with us, and she'll be running a session, a panel session with Tanya Gold on editing. A couple of little announcements from IPNE is that we have, in a week's time, we're going to start a really intense week of festivals. The Boston Book Festival is taking place in Copley Square on Saturday, the 15th of October. So we're all kind of praying for a day like today, beautiful weather. And it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful festival. And the entire area around Copley Square, there are thousands of venues. We'll be holding a panel ourselves in the library. And if you haven't been into the Boston Public Library, it's gorgeous. So it should be a fantastic event. That's Saturday, the 15th October. And then Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, the 16th, 17th, and 18th of October is the New England Library Association's annual event. And that will be taking place in Danvers, Massachusetts. And IPNE will be there as well. We also run an awards program, and some very, very wonderful librarians have been judging on that program. There are 14 different categories, 3 judges in each category. So a big thank you to the librarians out there who are involved in IPNE. It's the 16th, 17th, 18th of October in Danvers, Mass. And then we have our annual conference that's taking place on Saturday the 21st and Friday the 21st and Saturday the 22nd of October in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Kate will be joining us there. So with that said, someone just wrote in and said, oh, your name is the blue pencil, not the red pencil, because of your approach to editing. So that's quite good. We used to argue about using green for good and red for bad, and it all got very silly in education. Okay, but I miss it. Okay, great. Thanks so much, Kate, and I look forward to talking with you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Okay. And to all of our audience, we're looking forward to talking with you again soon. Bye now.